I want to play that clip again in which President Trump yesterday was talking about media coverage of terrorist attacks. Let's roll the tape.
You've seen what happened in Paris and Nice. All over Europe, it's happening. It's gotten to a point where it's not even being reported. And in many cases, the very, very dishonest press doesn't want to report it. They have their reasons, and you understand that.
After he said that, the White House released a list of the attacks that he was supposedly referring to as, in his words, not even being reported. I want to put up some footage of CNN reporters covering the attacks on that list. I spent 2 weeks in Paris in 2015 reporting on the attacks. We also see on the screen dozens of my colleagues, Alison Camerata covering the bombings in Brussels, Chris Cuomo and Anderson Cooper reporting on the supermarket attack in Paris, Brooke Baldwin covering the attack in Nice, Victor Blackwell reporting on the shootings in San Bernardino. Kellyanne, CNN and other media organizations cover terrorism around the world all the time. Saying that we don't cover terrorism, that's just false.
What the president is saying there, Jake, is that there are other attacks that don't get as much coverage. Obviously, the very sad incidents that you related where, frankly, CNN did amazing coverage for weeks at a time. I saw you all there on the ground doing that and telling the human interest stories and the tragic stories and, frankly, the involvement of the terrorists in those brutal attacks. Those get coverage. The other ones on the list, not so much. I think his point is twofold.
Those ones were on the list, but the ones I just recited for you were on the list.
Absolutely. Oh, no, and I'm saying the ones that have high casualties, like Nice and Brussels and certainly Paris and the like, those are covered extensively by all media outlets, as well they should be. It's the other ones on the list. I think he's making 2 points here. One is that we just can't allow ourselves to become inured to terrorist attacks, to see it as the new normal. And so if we're not covering all of the many different attacks and that they're all ISIL-inspired attacks, in this case, the ones that he was referring to in the list that was generated, as I understand, Jake, then we want people to realize that then that's what leads him to want extreme vetting from prescribed countries in a very temporary way. Number two, the point that he is making is, according to the Tyndall report and other sources, we have inordinate coverage on candidate Trump during the Republican primary, 333 minutes on him, and really, I mean, 5 times as much coverage on him as these terrorist attacks, and frankly, more coverage by the major networks, at the very least, on Prince's death, the artist named Prince.
Tyndall covers the 3-network evening news broadcasts.
Well, that's right, they do.
That's not reflective of the entire media.
No, I understand, but I'm trying to tell you, you're asking me why he said this, and I'm responding to the question.
Your spin about the idea that we don't want to be inured to that's a lovely spin, but that's not what he was saying, Kellyanne. He was saying the media does not cover these stories because we don't want to cover them because we have some sort of agenda. That's what he was suggesting, and it's offensive given the fact that CNN and other media organizations have reporters in danger right now in war zones covering ISIS. And I just don't understand how the president can make an attack like that.
There's no question about that. Well, first of all, I want to tell you, I don't intend it as spin. I'm crediting the coverage that CNN and your colleagues across the media gave to these high-profile and high-casualty, very sad, very vicious attacks.
They were on the list of undercovered attacks.
As were dozens and dozens of others. But I do know what the president's point was because I've discussed it with him directly. And it's that we need to make sure that people understand that what was stated by Hillary Clinton, Secretary Clinton, in her convention speech, these are our determined enemies, is a really light way of referring to radical Islamic terrorism. He's willing to name it, and it was a big piece of his campaign. And frankly, Jake, if you look at the polls, including CNN's polls, national security and terrorism were important issues to many Americans. He made it a point to show real distinction there, and he wants to show a point as president in the real distinction, because there seems to be some coverage these days, maybe not here, but definitely elsewhere, that somehow terrorism is not a big problem, or somehow national security is all taken care of, and that's just not true. And I think when you're talking about his extreme vetting, he is making the point that that is in response to the threat of terrorism globally.
I don't know who is making the case that terrorism is not a serious problem, though I do appreciate your citing a CNN poll. President Trump was clearly saying that the media does not cover terrorist attacks that we clearly cover, and he was saying we don't do it because we don't want to do it and because we have some sort of ulterior motive in that. That's not what you're saying right now, but that is what he's saying. But while we're on the subject of not addressing a terrorist attack, I want to ask you, in Quebec City last week, a white right-wing terrorist opened fire on a mosque filled with innocent men, women, and children. 6 people were killed. President Trump has not said or tweeted one public word about this. You want to talk about ignoring terrorism? Why hasn't the president offered his sympathy to our neighbors in the north?
I know he's sympathetic to any loss of life. It's completely senseless, and it needs to stop regardless of who is lodging the attack. We of course are very sad about loss of life here, and he is talking about trying to stop terrorism and people who want to do harm to this country. And I'm sure in the case of our neighbors to the north, I'm glad that the Prime Minister of Canada is coming here next week. I'm sure they'll talk about that if he's coming soon, as I understand. But the fact is that I will ask him, he doesn't tweet about everything, he doesn't make a comment about everything, but I can tell you that the entire point that I do think has been misinterpreted many places about why he wants extreme vetting, in this case temporary and through 7 very narrowly prescribed countries that the Obama administration, President Obama's administration, Congress thought needed more, quote, serious screening. He is doing that in response to what he sees and he hears in his briefings as the advance and the continued threat of terrorist acts, not unlike the one that you're citing to our friends in the north. And of course, put us on record as always being sad about this as a senseless loss of life.
He tweeted when there was that attack at the Louvre Museum where nobody was killed. I don't understand why he wouldn't tweet when 6 Canadian citizens were murdered, except for the fact that the undercover document that the White House distributed the other day, last night rather, also did not mention any attacks other than those committed by Muslim terrorists. And obviously radical Islamic terrorism is a big problem, but there are all sorts of kinds of horrific terrorism that take place. We saw some of that in South Carolina recently. And I guess the question is, are these victims any less dead than the ones killed by Islamic radical terrorists?
No, not at all. And of course, Jake, you're right. If you look back at Orlando, Omar Mateen was born in this country, and that was an incredible, unspeakable tragedy. 49 innocent lives taken at the Pulse nightclub. But I'm glad that we're all at least in agreement, it seems, that this is an issue that will continue, that this president says, and whether it's the lawsuits currently pending, the hearing tonight, or really litigation on the merits ultimately, that he believes his executive order is not just within his authority, but also his duty and responsibility to do what he sees best to try to protect the lives and the safety of Americans. It's temporary, it's narrowly prescribed. There are some 43 or more countries that are majority Muslim that are not on the list, and this is a list that was put forth first by the previous
Obama administration and Congress.
Well,
absolutely.
only because they thought that you needed, quote, I think it was, quote, stricter screening or some of the words.
But they didn't say shut down immigration from those countries. They just said that needed stricter screening, and they put stricter screening measures into place. I guess what I'm getting at here is there is a larger campaign being waged by President Trump and by the White House to undermine the credibility of everybody in the news media except for certain supportive outlets. And for instance, earlier today, President Trump made a quote about the murder rate being at the highest level it's ever been in 47 years. He said that, and he said nobody in the media reports on that. There's a reason that nobody in the media reports on that. It's not true. The murder rate is not at the highest rate it's been in 47 years. It spiked a little, it went up a little, but it's still much, much lower. It's 4.9 people per 100,000. That's dwarfed by the murder rates in the 1990s and before that in the 1980s. Facts are stubborn things. And to say that we're not reporting something that happens not to be true, therefore we're not to be trusted, that's a problem.
Well, Jake, if I can take the broader issue of our relationship with the media, I mean, I'm among, if not the most open press person in the White House. I'm now being attacked by the media, including networks that are familiar to you, and I'm just going to keep soldiering on. I mean, I came to this White House to serve this president who's serving people. I have in my portfolio here veterans, I have women and children, I have opioid use, and we're working on all of that. I sat in on the sheriff's roundtable today. I sat in on the Veterans Affairs, and I know that that's something near and dear to your heart because I see you often give voice and visibility, lend your considerable platform to our fallen soldiers and to our brave men and women in uniform. On that, we agree. And if we can find areas of agreement, give me a call, because I sat in on that. I had sat in on a similar meeting in Mar-a-Lago over the holidays, a working session. We had some of the top minds and leaders in healthcare here to the White House today, so they can advise